Greiner Talks, about sustainability and transformation. A Greiner podcast episode.
How to create a sustainable future. How to change. That's what we are discussing here. My name is Alexander. I'm part of the sustainability team at Greiner. In this episode, I will be speaking to an amazing human being who is incredibly passionate about sustainability. She spent 18 years in the Arctic, where she saw climate change happening firsthand. She's a speaker, she's an artist, and she's the founder of the startup Earth Plus. Welcome, Elena Doms.
Hi, Alexander. Thank you so much for having me here and for such a nice introduction. I really appreciate it.
Elena, your LinkedIn tells me you are a very busy person. Where are you right now? How's your day?
I'm right now in Belgium. I actually live in Belgium for over 15 years now. So my day is going awesome because I'm talking to you.
Oh, thank you so much. Elena, you are now in Belgium, but you grew up in a different part of the world. And actually, we all have one thing in common. We can't choose where on this planet we are born and where we grow up. So I'd like to know from you, where exactly did you grow up and how did that influence your life?
I grew up in a city called Arkhangelsk, which is right next to the polar circle. I didn't think it was really outstanding or special until I started sharing with other people how I grew up. I grew up with a lot of snow and ice. I grew up with polar nights and polar days in summer. I grew up going to the forests. I grew up swimming in a very cold river. I grew up seeing aurora lights. So that was my childhood.
I think we need a quick geography lesson here. Where exactly is that city located and what regions are actually part of the Arctic?
So, a quick geography lesson. If you have seen the GoldenEye James Bond movie, at the beginning of that movie, there is a scene that is supposedly taking place in my home city, Arkhangelsk, where they show this chemical weapons facility set in the high mountains. And that is where he defeats everyone, jumps off a cliff, catches up with a plane and flies away as a victor. So they say this is my home city, Arkhangelsk. In reality, this scene was filmed in Switzerland. But Arkhangelsk is located in the Russian part of the Arctic. And if you look at the geography and other countries that are located there are, of course, the US, the Nordics in Europe, parts of Canada as well.
You are actually the only person I know that grew up in the Arctic or in the polar region. So I'm wondering, how does a day in the childhood of Elena Doms look like? I also read that you are allergic to cold. How does that go together?
So I discovered that I'm allergic to cold only later on when I came to visit my parents. When we landed in my home city, the pilot said, "The weather in Arkhangelsk is really good today. It's minus 26 degrees. And I was thinking to myself, that's a lot, but nice optimism. It actually went down to minus 35 for a week. And this is when we had to run 500 meters and then get inside to warm up and then run again. And this is how we moved throughout the city. And when I came home, I discovered that my legs were swollen and itchy. And this is called cold urticaria, or allergy to cold. But how my days went, that depended, of course, on the time of the season. Because, for example, in winter, I was little, my dad would carry me all the way to kindergarten or to school. It was really cold, so he often carried me in his arms. My mom would dress me up super well in layers of clothes. Even my face was covered, and my dad would still rub my nose and my cheeks so they don't get frozen, because otherwise the skin would turn white and it would hurt for days. And in winters it was really, really dark. So we would go to school, it would be dark. We would come back home, it would be dark. There would be only a few hours of light during the day, but there would be a lot of snow, so there would be a lot of light reflection, and it would all be okay. And in summers, it was completely the opposite. We were spending summers in our summer house, where my parents grew food, which was fascinating in the Arctic. It's quite a zone of risky agriculture. And there it was almost complete day, and we would be planting strawberries and carrots and radishes and all kind of vegetables. And I would be playing with a lot of neighboring kids over there, spending a lot of time outside.
these very different seasons and this cold and this darkness, is that something that you can get used to or that you even miss nowadays?
Yes, I thought to myself lately that I really miss the cold and I would like to go to the Arctic to experience it. And I also definitely do miss the bright summers because it's just so lovely and nice. And yes, you might have difficulties falling asleep, but it's just such a lively season when everybody is outside, everybody is walking, everybody is celebrating the summer. So I miss that too.
Again, on your LinkedIn, you are saying that you have witnessed climate change firsthand. You have seen the Arctic change. Can you give us any concrete examples on what you have observed?
Yes, of course. I will give you two examples, one for winter and one for summer. So in winter, my home city is located on a river that splits the city into two parts. The width of the river is about 2.5 kilometers. One side of the river is the city center, and the other side are villages. And there are no bridges in between. So people from the villages, they sometimes go to work or to school on the other side of the river. And in summer, they can take a boat, and in winter, they literally walk on ice. By that, I don't mean that they just step on ice and walk anywhere. So authorities are constructing a special road, which the locals call the Road of Life. They wait until the ice is thick enough, about 40 centimeters, and then they install a road, they install lights, and people can walk on it. Now, in my home region, there are around 130 roads like this, because a lot of infrastructure in the Arctic is based on ice. And when I was little, winters were really cold. You could have around minus 30 degrees for a couple of months. But now the weather is really changing, and minus 30 is considered even abnormal. Temperatures in December and January are -7, -10, and sometimes above 0 degrees. And that means that the ice cannot freeze fast enough. And sometimes the roads are like this, are delayed for a month or almost 2 months. And during the pandemic, that really influenced the people that had to get to the hospitals with COVID, because there are no hospitals on the other side. And it was really challenging for the authorities to get them there. It was also challenging to deliver food and the basic supplies. And the second example is of the summer. So when we had that year of really bad floods in Europe, I remember in Belgium it was around 20 degrees the whole summer and it was raining all the time. But in my home city, it was above 30 degrees for 2 months. My mom said she hasn't seen anything like this before. She had to water the plants in the summer house every morning and every evening. And this is really not normal, because that also impacts the boreal rainforest located in the Arctic, and everything really dries up. So these are two really concrete examples of how weather is changing dramatically over there.
So that's very concrete examples that you have observed yourself. How are the changes in the Arctic impacting the rest of the world?
I'm really grateful that you asked this, because it's such an important question. Arctic is warming up 4 times faster than the rest of the planet, but it's connected with the rest of the planet. Actually, if you look at the concept of the tipping points, used in climate science, most of those tipping points are located in the Arctic or next to the Arctic region. I'll give an example of 2 of them. The first one is the Arctic sea ice. When the ocean in the Arctic is covered with ice, it's white, it reflects solar radiation. But when it melts, it exposes the dark sea, and the dark sea absorbs solar radiation instead, warms up, and the process continues. That means we are heating even more. Same with the boreal forests. If the weather is too dry, boreal forests are actually the largest carbon sink on land, and they store 11% of world carbon, mainly in their soils. When the weather is really dry, these forests dry up and they start burning and releasing these generations old carbon. And there are different tipping points like this in the Arctic. And through a chain of events, they connect to the tipping points all around the world, reaching all the way to Antarctica. And even though we think Arctic is really far away, in the end, it influences the whole world. It influences the weather patterns. It influences the crops around the world that filled billions of people.
Let's connect this story to what you are doing today, because we talked a lot about the Arctic, but you're not living there anymore. Now you're living in Belgium. And for the last 11 years, you have been working at MasterCard. Then you made a radical change in your life. I'm curious to know what happened, what triggered that change.
Well, MasterCard was a fantastic company to work for. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the vision and the digital technologies. But I always felt this in me when I saw changes happening in the Arctic, especially during the pandemic. I felt like I had to do something to make the future for my kids and all the kids in the world a little better. And when I was back at MasterCard, I met an entrepreneur, Frederick Verstraete, who is the CEO of Biotech now. He was working hard on decarbonizing construction because it's the industry that creates 39% of emissions and 30% of waste. And he was working on a switch to bio-based construction materials. But there was also this really big scandal in Belgium around forever chemicals and contamination that they create. There is an international chemical company located in Antwerp. They measured people's blood who were living around the factory. It was much higher than the limits. And the government obliged this company to look for solutions. Now, maybe just a very quick explainer, forever chemicals is everything that makes things non-stick and water resistant. So they're really useful in consumer products, but they also do not decompose in nature. They only burn at temperatures above 1400 degrees. And scientists fear they will stay there for millennia. They've been found in blood of almost all Europeans, in the blood of polar bears, in the Arctic ice. So the production process creates this pollution that spreads really far. And Frederick collaborated together with the University of Hasselt and ran one of the first pilots ever to try to clean up forever chemical contamination with plants. He tied it up, and from the clean plant parts, he created these bio-based materials for the construction industry, who were also fully circular. And I was so inspired by what he was doing when I came to Frederick and I said, we have to take this bigger. We have to create the soil and CO2 cleanup on land, kind of like the next ocean cleanup. And that's how we started Earth Plus.
So I have to break that down quickly because that's a lot of information. So forever chemicals, if I get it right, are chemicals that stick in the environment for a very long time and remain there. Can you give us some examples of what these forever chemicals are?
Yes. So this is a group of chemicals. If I remember correctly, there are around 30,000 of them. They are in our phones, in our laptops, in our cameras, sometimes in waterproof jackets, in paint, in furniture. So they surround us because they have very useful properties. But because of these properties, unfortunately, they also stick around in nature, in our bodies, and they are toxic. They can cause different diseases.
And now you're trying to clean the environment from these forever chemicals. Do I get that right? Can you give us an elevator pitch of Earth Plus?
Yes, of course. So at Earth Plus, we have a mission to create the largest soil and CO2 cleanup with nature. That means that we work on polluted lands, for example, with forever chemicals, but also oil spills or heavy metals. Now, what we do is we work together with our academic partners and scientists to find the selection of nature-based instruments, including plants, including fungi, including microbes, that would be able to clean and restore those lands. And because we use often plants with superpowers, these plants also capture a lot of CO2 in the process. One example of such plants is industrial hemp. So these plants, they take pollution from the ground. If we take the example of forever chemicals, they move this pollution through their stems and they accumulate this pollution in their leaves, which was a really fascinating discovery. Then the leaves can be separated from the stems. Leaves go through a special process where the temperatures are above 1400 degrees. It's also a circular process that we are working on together with our partners. And the stems are used to create bio-based circular materials. And examples of those are, for example, rainforest hemp wood that substitutes tropical wood and helps avoid deforestation. Biocomposites, which can be a plastic substitute, so you can make traffic poles out of it, but you can also make EV chargers, car bodies, different things. And biochar. Biochar is this black gold which you can mix in the soil, and it stores carbon for over 100 years. And it also brings the soil back, so you can reverse desertification. Now, All of this process is done by our partners, including C-Biotech. And Earth Plus is this technology layer on top that we are building to make sure that everything is fully transparent, that we can trace CO2 sequestration and soil restoration with the help of IoT devices, satellites, AI models, and algorithms, so that we can really prove that the action is happening on the ground, and we can make sure that more investments are flowing into nature restoration.
So when you're planting these superpower plants, for example, it's not enough to simply plant them and help them grow. You also have to harvest them and recycle the material, if I get that right.
Yes, absolutely. So if it's a polluted ground, we need to know where the pollution goes to, and we need to study that in a plant. We have to separate that, and we have to make sure that the pollution doesn't go further in the materials, that we don't complete the cycle. So the pollution has to be treated in a certain way. And then the rest of the plant, when plant grows, it stores a lot of CO2. It captures the CO2 in the biomass. If we just let that plant degrade, we let out all the CO2 back. So the goal here is to store the CO2 in the system for as long as possible. That's why we either go for biochar, that is storing this CO2 for over 100 years, or for circular materials that are truly circular without any waste. So we can put them in buildings or can put them on roads for years and years, and then at the end of life we can either reuse them fully, they're undamaged, or we can fully remake them into exactly the same materials without any waste. And this way we make sure that the local economy is circular, that we create jobs, but at the same time that the carbon is really stored in the system.
And that sounds super exciting. And of course, bio-based materials are an interesting opportunity for Greiner as well. We are already working with bio-based materials to a certain extent. So maybe I have to connect you to some of my colleagues.
That would be wonderful. But I looked at your sustainability agenda and I found it really impressive that you are aiming for full circularity by 2030. It's really great because we need to have companies and pioneers like that are not just setting targets for 2050, but that are really focusing on the immediate action.
And I am very impressed by what you are doing with your startup. How is it developing? What are your crucial next steps?
There are so many things that we have to do and that we want to achieve. So this year we had 9 live projects in Belgium on both polluted and non-polluted lands together with companies and cities. For next year, there are already a lot more lands that we have in Belgium, but we're also setting up different partnerships in the UK, in Australia, and the US to replicate this model with other local partners, because the goal is not to ship a bunch of Belgians everywhere, but to really create local circular economy and local jobs. And also we are working together with our partners to build this technology layer where we can ensure full transparency. And this is also really, really exciting. And of course, the next step is to involve a lot of companies in these sustainability efforts of capturing CO2, cleaning up the pollution, restoring the lands, and sequestering carbon.
There's one thing I know for sure, that you are creating positive impact with your job. And it seems like quite a lot of people out there, especially young people, are looking for jobs that create positive impact. So do you have any advice for somebody who wants to change or who wants to create positive impact in his or her job?
I definitely do. In full transparency, it took me a long time to transition in sustainability. I always knew I wanted to work on it. I always knew I wanted to make positive impact. But there were many years when I was not doing that. And my advice for these young people that really want to make change would be, do not wait. Do not wait for a better opportunity that might come up in the future. Be proactive and listen to your heart. If that's really what you want to do it now. Do not spend the next 10 years waiting around thinking you don't have the right experience or the right knowledge. Just dive deep in. And actually, we don't have that time to wait around, right? We need this action now. And my second advice would be really connect with people, network. Sustainability space is such a wonderful space to work in because everything here is about collaboration. People are so incredibly open. In fact, it's about radical collaboration, right? Because that's what we need to make a true change. And it's such a supportive community. It's such a daring community that really creates hope and really implements innovations. So network, talk to many people, raise your voice, use social media to build your profile so that the opportunities can come to you. Go to events if that's what you like, but be proactive in making that change, and these opportunities will really show themselves.
Listening to your heart and collaborating, that's two amazing advice I'll take with me.
Thank you.
And I'd love to ask you many more questions, but we are slowly running out of time. So before I let you go, I'd like to invite you to do a short word wrap with me. I will give you one word, one term, and you can reply with whatever comes to your mind.
Oh, wow, okay. Let's try this.
So the first one is home.
Arctic.
Underwater hockey.
Lots of fun.
Any advice for somebody who wants to join underwater hockey?
That wouldn't be in one word though, but happy to give it.
Painting.
Iceberg.
Belgium.
Home.
Feeling cold.
Amazing.
One thing you miss about your childhood.
Being a little kid surrounded by love from my mom and dad.
And last but not least, your message to the world.
Positive action now.
That's a very positive, a very short message. We will definitely take that home with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elena, for taking your time. It was a lovely conversation.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. I really enjoyed it.
And thank you everyone for listening. Make sure to visit Elena Doms on LinkedIn to get weekly sustainability updates. Have a look at her startup's website, earthplus.eu, and have a nice day.
Greiner Talks, a Greiner podcast. Subscribe now.